What's up, guys? It's Mr. Comer here, and I'd like to welcome you to part 2 of your Chemistry of Living Things, green sheet presentations. And this one, we are going to focus mainly on photosynthesis and respiration. And when we're talking about photosynthesis and respiration, I want you to kind of realize the subtle points here, all right? So this green sheet presentation isn't going to be very vocabulary driven. I'm going to try to do my best at the end to summarize all the different words that I use, but I really want you guys to focus in on some concepts here, all right? And that concept is energy. Energy is a central concept here. Energy, as you may remember, is the ability to do work. Well, what does that really mean? In living things. In living things, we need energy to power our metabolism in order to maintain homeostasis. In other words, living things need food. And the energy from the food powers or moves the molecules that occur inside of cells, or the chemical reactions that are happening, in order for the organism to stay balanced. If an organism does not eat food, it can't power its chemical reactions, and therefore it will not be balanced. It will be in a disease state and or dying. So food equals life, all right? So when we're talking about photosynthesis and respiration, what we're really talking about is photosynthesis, this process by which plants make food, which is really important for all organisms, as you'll start to see. And then respiration, this process by which all organisms use the energy that's inside food. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of photosynthesis and respiration, I want to take a step back and take a look at the big picture, all right? When we're looking at the big picture, we need to understand that energy flows through ecosystems. An ecosystem is all of the living and non-living things that occur in an environment, all right? And what you're looking at right here is a food chain, and maybe you've seen these before, but what they show is the relationship of energy between organisms in an ecosystem. In other words, all of the energy in this food chain is coming from the sun. The sun is the primary source of energy for all living things. And what happens is that energy kind of gets eaten by the grass. And each of these arrows could indicate the direction of the flow of energy. Or in other words, you can say gets eaten by. So the energy that's in the grass gets eaten by the grasshopper. The energy that's in the grasshopper gets eaten by the mouse, and so on and so forth, all right? That energy that came from the sun gets stored in the bonds of the glucose molecules inside the grass. And then that grass gets eaten by the grasshopper. Now that grasshopper is made up of energy, which is in the bonds of that organism, which gets eaten by the mouse, and so on and so forth. So we need to recognize that energy kind of is a one-way flow, and we have a constant source of it, which is the sun. That's a little different than materials. Materials and chemicals cycle within a food chain. So for instance, this grass molecule, this grass is kind of breathing out oxygen. Every time it does a good thing like make glucose, it does a bad thing. And that oxygen is going into the grasshopper, and this grasshopper is then breathing out CO2, which is getting eaten by the grass in order to make glucose, all right? So energy is kind of flowing in a one-way direction, but these materials are constantly cycling throughout all of the organisms. All right. So that's kind of like a big picture view of it. And really what we're talking about is how living things get food. How are organisms getting food in order to use the energy? So there are two different ways that living things get food. All right. You can be a heterotroph, like an animal, and this means that you're an organism that obtains its food from the environment. You are eating other organisms. All right. In this case, a lion hunting a gazelle. He's going to get his energy eating that gazelle, all right? You could also be an autotroph. And an autotroph is an organism like a plant that produces its own food. For example, an apple tree that's making its own food via photosynthesis. So we have two ways to get food. You can be a heterotroph or you can be an autotroph. All green plants are photosynthetic autotrophs, which means green plants use photosynthesis to make food by using the energy in sunlight to create glucose. All plants need water that they get from the roots, sunlight, which they absorb through their leaves, and carbon dioxide, which they absorb from their leaves, to make sugar or glucose. In doing so, giving off oxygen as a waste product. It's also important to know that photosynthesis occurs in the chloroplasts of plant cells, which are located in high frequency inside the leaves of green plants. And leaves also have these tiny things called stomata, which allow for gases to exchange. In other words, in order for carbon dioxide to come in and oxygen to come out. And they regulate water loss by opening and closing using special structures called guard cells. Both plants and animals convert energy that's in glucose to a chemical known as ATP during the process of cellular respiration. All right, so this is everything that you need to know about cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is the process by which living things release the energy from food to power their cells. During respiration, the energy that's in food molecules is transformed into a molecule of ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. Mitochondria is the cell organelle in which cellular respiration takes place. And during aerobic cellular respiration, oxygen and glucose are needed to create ATP, giving off water and carbon dioxide as waste product. There are two different types of respiration. The first is aerobic respiration, and this is respiration that requires oxygen. One of the main factors here in aerobic respiration is this makes a tremendous amount of ATP, a lot of energy. And it also gives off carbon dioxide and water as waste products. Some organisms, and even sometimes things in our own body, cells of our own body, can also perform anaerobic respiration. And this is a form of respiration that does not require oxygen, and it's also known as fermentation. All right? Anaerobic respiration only makes a small amount of ATP, but it also makes poisonous waste such as alcohol and lactic acid, which cause muscle fatigue. So in summary, and this should kind of help you while you're filling out your green sheet, energy from food powers metabolism or life functions. Metabolism is all of the chemical reactions that occur in a living thing. And life functions must be performed in order for an organism to stay balanced or maintain homeostasis. Energy from the sun flows through the food chain while materials cycle. Chemical bonds in food store energy that living things use. We also need to know that organisms make their own food. We call them autotrophs. And all plants are photosynthetic autotrophs, while animals are heterotrophs. Photosynthesis is the process by which we make food from solar energy and takes place in the chloroplasts of cells. And respiration is the process by which we make ATP, or a usable form of energy, from glucose. And this takes place in the mitochondria. All organisms, both plants and animals, perform respiration. Anaerobic respiration does not use oxygen, where aerobic respiration does. So with that being said, you guys should be able to fill out your green sheet, all right? The last thing that I want you guys to do is just use the words that are in the left-hand side of your screen to kind of complete this flowchart. And that flowchart will help you when you're trying to organize all of these terms in terms of